James Carter sat on the park bench, its splintered wood creaking beneath him, as if it too carried the weight of years. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across Lincoln Park, warming his weathered hands, folded neatly in his lap. His olive-green jacket, frayed at the cuffs, smelled faintly of earth and memory, a relic from Vietnam's jungles, where mud and blood had once been his constant companions. At 68, James was a man most barely noticed, a black veteran with eyes that held too much, shoulders bowed by time and unspoken grief. Around him, the city hummed. Children's laughter ricocheted off the playground. A jogger's sneakers thumped rhythmically, and leaves rustled in the breeze, carrying the sharp scent of pine. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth settle on his face. For a moment, he was not here, not in this urban sprawl, but back in Da Nang, 1970, crouched in the rain with his squad, the air thick with diesel and fear. He could still hear Private Ellis's voice, young and cracking, promising they'd all make it home. Ellis never did. James's jaw tightened, and he pushed the memory down, deep where it couldn't cut. He opened his eyes, focusing on a squirrel darting across the grass, its tiny claws scratching the earth. Life moved on, relentless, even if he sometimes felt left behind. A young girl no older than 7 ran past, her ponytail bouncing, an ice cream cone dripping chocolate onto her fingers. She glanced at James, curiosity flickering in her brown eyes before her mother's call pulled her away. James's lips twitched in a half-smile. Kids saw things adults missed, maybe because they hadn't yet learned to look away. He shifted, the bench groaning, and let his gaze drift to the basketball court across the path. Teenagers shouted, their voices sharp with bravado, the ball slamming against the asphalt. One boy, lanky and quick, missed a shot, and the ball rolled toward James's feet. "Hey, sir, can you toss it back?" the boy called, jogging over, his sneakers scuffing the dirt. James leaned forward, his movements slow but steady, and picked up the ball. Its leather was warm, worn smooth by countless hands. He tossed it gently, his arm stronger than it looked. The boy caught it, grinning. "Thanks, man." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, then ran back to his friends. James watched him go, a flicker of warmth in his chest. Connection, however brief, was rare these days. He leaned back, the bench's slats digging into his spine, and let the park's rhythm wash over him. The city's pulse was steady, cars honking faintly beyond the trees, a dog barking in the distance, the soft chatter of a couple strolling by. "He's here every afternoon," the woman said, her voice kind but distant, as if James were a fixture, not a person. "Never bothers anyone," her companion replied. James's fingers tightened on his knees. Kindness with boundaries, he thought. Always just out of reach. His mind wandered to the war again, unbidden. The thump of helicopter blades, the weight of his M16, the way Max, his unit's German shepherd, would press against his leg during patrols, ears pricked for danger. Max had saved him once, dragging him from a burning ditch when a grenade went off too close. James's hand brushed the scar on his forearm, hidden beneath his sleeve. He hadn't seen Max in decades, but the dog's loyalty lingered, a tether to a time when trust meant survival. The park's peace began to fray. Footsteps, deliberate and heavy, cut through the ambient hum. James opened his eyes, his soldier's instinct prickling. 3 police officers approached, their uniforms crisp, boots clicking on the pavement. The lead officer, broad-shouldered with tired blue eyes, scanned the path, his gaze locking onto James. The other 2, younger, followed close, their hands resting near their belts. James sat up straighter, folding his hands, his pulse steady but alert. The air shifted, heavy with the scent of authority. "Evening, sir," the lead officer said, his voice clipped, eyes narrowing. "You've been here a while." James met his gaze, calm but unyielding. "Just enjoying the afternoon, officer." His voice was soft, weathered, carrying the weight of years. The officer hesitated, something flickering in his expression, doubt perhaps, but the moment passed. The younger officer, restless, stepped forward. "Mind telling us why you're here? Park closes soon." James's chest tightened, an old ache resurfacing. He searched their faces for understanding, but found only suspicion, cold and unyielding. "I come here every day," he said, his words measured. "It's where I find peace." The restless officer glanced at his watch, unimpressed. "You sure you're not waiting for someone?" James shook his head, a faint tremor in his voice. Not fear, but exhaustion. "No, officer. Just the sun." The third officer, a woman with her hair pulled tight, knelt to his level, her tone softer but guarded. "Sir, we're just making sure you're not causing trouble. We've had complaints about loitering." James looked at her, hurt flashing across his face. "Do I look like trouble?" he asked, barely above a whisper. She faltered, her eyes softening for a heartbeat, then stood, smoothing her uniform. "We're just doing our job, sir." The park's hum faded, replaced by a tense silence. Bystanders glanced over, a mother pulling her daughters close, an elderly man muttering under his breath, the teenagers pausing their game. James felt their eyes, some curious, some wary, none truly seeing him. The officers stood closer now, their shadows stretching across the bench, cold and sharp. He braced himself, knowing too well that peace for men like him was often just a pause between battles. The air in Lincoln Park thickened, heavy with the scent of pine and unspoken accusations. James Carter sat rigid on the weathered bench, his hands clasped tightly, as the three police officers loomed before him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, their dark edges creeping across the grass like fingers of doubt. Officer Daniel Walsh, the broad-shouldered leader with tired blue eyes, stood closest, his gaze flickering between James and the gathering crowd. Officer Ethan Brooks, younger and restless, paced a few steps, his boots scuffing the pavement, while Officer Sarah Conway, her posture stiff despite her softer tone, scanned the park for any sign of trouble. "You've been here every day, you say," Walsh said, his voice low but edged with suspicion. "Mind showing us some ID?" James nodded slowly, his movements deliberate, as if any sudden motion might tip the fragile balance. He reached into his frayed olive-green jacket, pulling out a worn leather wallet. His fingers, calloused from years of gripping rifles and shovels, brushed against the faded Marine Corps ID tucked inside. He handed it to Walsh, who flipped it open, his eyes narrowing at the photograph. A younger James, stern and proud, staring back from 1973. "James Carter, United States Marine Corps," Walsh read aloud, his tone flat. He glanced at James, then back at the ID, as if the man before him couldn't possibly match the soldier in the photo. "This is old." James met his gaze, steady. "It's still me," Brooks snorted, crossing his arms. "You expect us to believe you're just sitting here day after day doing nothing? People don't do that unless they're up to something." James's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm, weathered by years of enduring. "I fought for this country, officer. All I want now is a quiet place to think." Conway shifted, her eyes flickering with unease, but she said nothing. Walsh handed the wallet back, his expression unreadable. "You were in Vietnam," he said, less a question than a statement. James nodded. "A long time ago." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with unspoken questions, but Walsh's face hardened. "Doesn't explain why you're here now." The crowd grew, drawn by the tension like moths to a flame. A mother clutched her daughter's hands, her face taut with worry. An elderly man in a red cap muttered, "Leave him be." But his voice was lost in the murmur of whispers. The teenagers from the basketball court edged closer, their game forgotten, the ball idle at their feet. One boy, tall and lanky with deep brown skin, watched James with hesitant empathy, his friends shuffling behind him. "Why are they messing with him?" he whispered, but no one answered. James felt the weight of their stares, a familiar sting. He'd faced suspicion before, on city streets, in quiet diners, even in the VA hospital where nurses sometimes looked past him. But here in this park, where the scent of grass and sunlight promised peace, it cut deeper. He glanced at the crowd, searching for a single face that saw him, not the story they'd already written. He found none. Brooks stepped forward, his impatience boiling over. "Look, park's closing soon. You need to move along." His voice carried, sharp enough to make the mother flinch. James took a slow breath, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of being questioned for existing. "This is my home too," he said, his words soft but firm. "I'm not breaking any laws." Brooks scoffed, gesturing sharply. "You know how many calls we get about loitering. Families don't feel safe with guys like you hanging around." The words landed like a blow, and James's eyes darkened, memories surging. He saw himself at 22, crawling through jungle mud, Max's bark cutting through the chaos, guiding him to safety. He'd survived ambushes, bullets, and grief, only to come home to this, a world that saw him as a threat, not a protector. He wanted to shout, to tell them about the lives he'd saved, the brothers he'd lost. But the words stayed locked inside, heavy as stone. Conway knelt again, her voice softer, almost pleading. "Sir, we're not trying to make this hard. Just help us out. Tell us why you're really here." James looked at her, hurt flickering across his face. "I already did," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I come here to remember, to feel human again." Conway hesitated, her hand twitching as if she wanted to reach out, but duty pulled her back. She stood, looking away, her jaw tight. The crowd's whispers grew louder, a mix of curiosity and judgment. "He doesn't look homeless," a woman murmured. "Maybe he's just lonely," another replied, but her tone held distance, as if loneliness were a crime. The elderly man in the red cap stepped forward, his voice shaking. "He's not hurting anyone. Why don't you check on real problems?" Brooks shot him a glare. "Stay out of this, sir." James's hands clenched in his lap, the scar on his forearm burning beneath his sleeve. He thought of Ellis, his squad mate, laughing over warm beer in Saigon, promising to open a bar when they got home. Ellis's face, bloodied and still, haunted James's dreams. He'd carried that loss for decades, along with the weight of being invisible in a country he'd fought for. Now, as the officers closed in, that weight felt unbearable. Walsh cleared his throat, his tone softer but guarded. "We're not saying you did anything wrong, Mr. Carter, but we can't have people lingering for hours." "It makes folks nervous." James looked at him, searching for a crack in the wall of suspicion. "Nervous," he repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "I sit here, watch the birds, and that makes people nervous?" Walsh shifted, uncomfortable, but held his ground. "It's just procedure." The teenagers exchanged glances, the lanky boy muttering, "This ain't right." His friends nodded, their faces etched with unease, but they stayed back, unsure. The mother pulled her daughters closer, whispering, "Let's go." But her older girl resisted, eyes fixed on James. "Is he in trouble, Mom?" she asked, her voice small. The mother forced a smile, but her hands trembled. James stood, his movements slow, deliberate, the bench creaking as he rose. His jacket hung loose on his frame, but his posture was straight, a soldier's pride unbroken. "If it's trouble you're looking for, you won't find it with me," he said, his voice steady, eyes locked on Walsh. "But if it's peace you're protecting, you're taking it from the wrong man." The officers stiffened, caught off guard by his quiet defiance. The crowd held its breath, the park's golden light dimming as clouds slid across the sun, casting the scene in a cold, uncertain haze. The park's golden light faded to a muted gray as clouds thickened overhead, mirroring the tension coiling around James Carter. He stood before the splintered bench, his olive green jacket catching the breeze, its frayed edges whispering of battles long past. The three officers, Daniel Walsh, Ethan Brooks, and Sarah Conway, formed a tight semicircle, their faces a mix of duty and unease. The crowd, now a loose ring of onlookers, pressed closer, their murmurs buzzing like static. The air carried the sharp tang of pine and something heavier, suspicion, ready to ignite. Walsh, his blue eyes weary but resolute, gestured toward the path. "Mr. Carter, let's make this simple. Move along and we can all go home." His tone held a plea, but his posture was unyielding. James's hands hung loose at his sides, but his gaze was steady, unbowed. "I am home," he said, his voice low, resonant with years of endurance. "This park, this bench, it's where I belong." Brooks scoffed, his restlessness boiling over. "Belong? This isn't your living room, old man." The words stung, but James's expression didn't waver. He saw himself at 22, crouched in a Vietnam foxhole, Max's warm fur pressed against his leg, the dog's eyes glinting with trust. That bond had kept him alive when bullets sang and hope faltered. Now, facing these officers, he drew on that same quiet strength. "I've earned my place here," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "More than you know." Conway's eyes flickered with doubt, her hand hovering near her radio. She opened her mouth, perhaps to soften the moment, but Brooks cut in, his voice sharp. "We're done talking. You're leaving, or we're making you leave." He turned to Walsh, nodding toward the radio clipped to his belt. "Call it in. Get the K9 unit." Walsh hesitated, his jaw tightening, but he lifted the radio. "Dispatch, this is Walsh. Send Matthews and the K9 to Lincoln Park, north entrance." The crowd stirred, whispers turning to gasps. The mother clutched her daughters, her face pale. "They're bringing a dog?" her older girl whispered, eyes wide. The lanky teenager, Malik, stepped forward, his friends trailing behind. "Yo, this is too much," he muttered, his voice shaking with defiance. "He's just sitting there." The elderly man in the red cap gripped his cane, his voice rising. "You ought to be ashamed, harassing a man like that." James felt the park's pulse quicken, the air crackling with anticipation. He stood taller, his scar throbbing beneath his sleeve, a reminder of survival. He'd faced worse than this: ambushes, explosions, the weight of loss. But the threat of a K9 stirred something deeper, a memory of loyalty and sacrifice. He pushed it down, focusing on the officers' faces, searching for a crack in their resolve. Before Walsh could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, deep and commanding. "What's going on here?" A tall black man, broad-shouldered and sturdy, strode toward the group, his battered cap adorned with military pins glinting in the dim light. His eyes locked onto James, recognition sparking. "James Carter, is that you?" James's face softened, relief flooding his features. "Thomas Reed. Been a long time, brother." Thomas planted himself beside James, his presence a shield. He turned to the officers, his voice steady, fierce. "This man's a hero. Saved lives in Vietnam, more than I can count. You're out here treating him like a criminal?" Walsh shifted, uncomfortable, but Brooks bristled. We're doing our job, sir. Step back. Thomas didn't budge, his hands balling into fists. Your job? Harassing a veteran who just wants to sit in peace? You don't know who you're dealing with. The crowd leaned in, drawn by Thomas's conviction. Malik's eyes widened, his friends whispering, "He's a soldier?" The mother's grip on her daughters loosened, her expression softening. Conway's radio crackled, breaking the moment. "K9 units 2 minutes out," the dispatcher's voice announced. James's chest tightened, his breath shallow. He glanced at Thomas, who gave a subtle nod, a silent promise. "I've got your back." The sound of heavy paws and a low bark echoed from the path. Officer Matthews, a wiry man with a tight grip on a leash, appeared, a German shepherd straining at his side. The dog, muscular and alert, fixed its gaze on James, ears pricked, body taut. Matthews' face was all business. "What's the situation?" he asked, his voice clipped. Brooks gestured sharply. "This guy won't move. Clear the area." James's eyes locked onto the dog, a flicker of something ancient stirring in his chest. Memories surged. Jungle rain. Max's bark cutting through the chaos. The dog's weight pulling him from danger. He swallowed, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from a longing he hadn't felt in years. Thomas stepped forward, his voice raw. "You're making a mistake. This man's done nothing wrong." Matthews ignored him, giving a command. "Rex, stay." The dog sat, muscles quivering, eyes never leaving James. The park seemed to hold its breath, the crowd frozen, phones raised to capture the moment. The mother shielded her younger daughter, whispering, "It's okay, baby." Malik's hands clenched, his voice low. "They can't do this." Walsh, sensing the scrutiny, raised a hand. "Let's keep this calm, everyone. No need for trouble." But Brooks, his face flushed, nodded at Matthews. "Deploy the dog." "Let's end this." Matthews' jaw clenched, his hand loosening the leash. "Rex, go." The shepherd sprang forward, barking, a blur of power and precision. The crowd gasped, some stepping back, others leaning in. Thomas moved to block James, but James, suddenly calm, placed a hand on his arm. "No, Thomas, let him come." His voice was steady, almost serene, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. The dog closed the distance, its paws pounding the grass, eyes locked on James, and the world narrowed to a single, suspended heartbeat, poised on the edge of chaos. The park held its breath as Rex, the German shepherd, charged toward James Carter, his powerful strides tearing up the grass. The late afternoon air, thick with the scent of pine and tension, seemed to pulse with the dog's sharp barks. James stood motionless, his olive-green jacket catching the fading light, his eyes locked on the approaching animal. The crowd, mothers, teenagers, strangers, froze, phones trembling in their hands, capturing a moment teetering between disaster and miracle. Officer Matthews gripped the leash's end, his voice cracking. "Rex, hold!" But the dog's focus was singular, unwavering, as if drawn by a force stronger than training. James knelt slowly, his knees creaking, hands open at his sides. His face softened, a flicker of recognition sparking in his weathered eyes. "Hey there, old friend," he whispered, his voice breaking with a tenderness that silenced the murmurs. Rex slowed, nose twitching, ears flicking forward. The dog's fierce charge faltered, replaced by a hesitant step, then another, until he was inches from James. The crowd gasped, a collective inhale, as Rex's gaze met James's, and something impossible unfolded. Instead of lunging, Rex whimpered, a soft, aching sound, and pressed his head into James's chest, tail wagging furiously. His muscular body, trained for control, melted into pure devotion, nuzzling James as if greeting a brother lost to time. James wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, tears streaming down his face, his voice a shaky murmur. "You remember me, don't you? We were family out there." The park, moments ago a battlefield of suspicion, dissolved into awe, the air alive with gasps and muffled sobs. Thomas Reed, standing beside James, wiped his eyes, his voice trembling. "I don't believe it." Officer Matthews, stunned, took a step forward, his hand slack on the leash. "Rex, what are you doing?" But Rex ignored him, pressing closer to James, whining softly, his tail thumping the ground. Officer Walsh's face paled, his earlier certainty crumbling. This doesn't make sense," he muttered. Brooks, his bravado gone, stepped back, hands falling to his sides. Conway's eyes glistened, her rigid posture softening as she whispered, "How is this possible?" James buried his face in Rex's fur, the scent of dog and earth pulling him back to Vietnam. Jungle nights, the weight of Max's loyalty, the dog's bark guiding him through chaos. "You saved me, old boy," he said, his voice thick. "More than once." The crowd leaned in, drawn by the rawness of the moment. Malik, the lanky teenager, clutched his basketball, his voice barely audible. "That's real loyalty, man." His friends nodded, their usual swagger replaced by wonder. A woman in the crowd, her phone trembling, spoke through tears. "My dad was in the army. He said soldiers never forget their own." The mother, still holding her daughters, knelt beside them, her voice wavering. "See, sweetheart. Sometimes even heroes need love." Her younger girl, wide-eyed, whispered, "Why is the dog hugging him, Mommy?" The mother smiled, tears falling. "Because they're family." Matthews knelt beside Rex, his hand hovering before gently stroking the dog's back. "I've never seen him act like this," he said, his voice hushed, reverent. "Not with anyone." James lifted his gaze, meeting Matthew's eyes with a shaky smile. "We served together, in a place where trust was all we had. Vietnam, years ago. He found me when I was lost, pulled me out when I thought I was done." Matthews swallowed hard, his duty unraveling in the face of truth. "You were his handler." James nodded, his hands never leaving Rex's fur. "He was more than that." "He was my brother," the crowd murmured, the weight of his words sinking in. Thomas stepped forward, his voice ringing clear. "This man's not a stranger. He's a hero. How many times do we have to learn this lesson?" Walsh looked away, guilt etching his face. Brooks's shoulders sagged, his earlier aggression now a hollow memory. Conway cleared her throat, her voice unsteady. "We didn't know, sir. We're sorry." James shook his head, tears glinting. "I don't want apologies, just a little respect, a little dignity." The elderly man in the red cap nodded, his voice firm. "That's right. You hear him." The woman with the phone, still filming, found her voice. "This needs to be seen. The whole world should know who you are." Malik's friends murmured agreement, one blurting, "This is bigger than the park, man." Rex let out a contented sigh, his eyes fluttering shut as he leaned into James. The dog's warmth, his unwavering loyalty, lifted the weight James had carried for decades. Loneliness, rejection, the ache of being unseen. For the first time all day, he felt truly visible, held not just by Rex, but by the crowd's shifting energy. They weren't strangers anymore. They were witnesses to something sacred, a bond that outlived war and prejudice. Walsh spoke softly, almost to himself. "Sometimes the world shows us what matters." Thomas nodded, his hand resting on James's shoulder. "He's family to all of us now." James smiled, wiping his tears, his voice a whisper. "Thank you, Rex. You're still watching my back." The park, bathed in the last rays of dusk, seemed to glow, not with sunlight but with compassion, a fragile hope taking root in every heart. Matthews unclipped Rex's leash, letting the dog stay free at James's side. "He's earned this," he said, his voice thick. "We all have." The crowd circled closer, their faces a mosaic of awe and humility. Malik stepped forward, hesitating, then spoke. "Sir, can you tell us about it? About you and him?" His voice was earnest, hungry for truth. James looked at him, then at the crowd, their eyes no longer judging but pleading for understanding. He took a deep breath, the weight of his story ready to spill, knowing this moment, raw, real, and unbroken, would change them all. The dusk in Lincoln Park deepened, painting the grass in shades of velvet blue. But the warmth of James Carter's reunion with Rex lingered, a beacon in the gathering shadows. James knelt beside the German shepherd, his hands buried in the dog's thick fur, the scent of earth and loyalty grounding him. Rex's tail thumped softly, his eyes half closed in quiet joy. Around them, the crowd, once a wall of suspicion, drew closer, their faces softened by awe and shame. Thomas Reed stood sentinel at James's side, his military-pinned cap catching the last glimmers of light. The officers, Daniel Walsh, Ethan Brooks, and Sarah Conway, stood at the edge, their uniforms no longer a barrier, but a reminder of lessons unfolding. Malik, the lanky teenager, broke the sacred silence, his voice tentative but eager. "Sir, what was it like? You and Rex back then?" His friends leaned in, their basketball forgotten, eyes bright with curiosity. James looked up, his tear-streaked face steady, and took a slow breath. The air carried the cool bite of evening, mingling with the faint sweetness of blooming jasmine. "Vietnam was a place where every day tested you," he began, his voice low, resonant. "Mud up to your knees, rain that never stopped, and fear so thick you could taste it. But Rex, he was my anchor." He stroked the dog's ears, memories flooding back. "I was 22, barely knew who I was. Rex was our unit scout, trained to sniff out danger. But to me he was family. One night our patrol got ambushed. Grenade went off, knocked me into a ditch. Thought I was done." His voice cracked, and Rex whimpered, pressing closer. "He dragged me out, barking through the smoke, wouldn't let me go. Saved my life, and others too." The crowd listened, rapt, the park's hum fading to a hush. A woman with silver hair, her eyes misty, clutched a tissue. "You carried that all this time," she whispered. Thomas nodded, his voice thick. "James saved lives too. Carried a wounded man 3 miles through jungle to get him to a medic. Never asked for a medal, just did what was right." James shook his head, humble. "We all did what we had to. Rex, my squad, they're the heroes." Malik's friend, a boy with a faded hoodie, spoke up, voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "All this time sitting here?" James's gaze drifted to the bench, its splintered wood a silent witness. "Sometimes people don't want to hear. They see an old man, not the story behind him." Officer Walsh stepped forward, his face etched with guilt. "Mr. Carter, we got it wrong. I'm sorry." His voice was raw, the weight of his badge heavy. Conway nodded, her eyes glistening. "We should have listened, sir. Asked who you were." Brooks, his earlier bravado gone, looked at the ground, hands clenched. "I let assumptions take over. That's on me." James met their gazes, his expression forgiving but firm. "Takes courage to admit a mistake. What matters is what you do now. The crowd murmured agreement, a ripple of unity spreading. The mother, her daughters clinging to her, spoke softly. "My husband's deployed. He says soldiers carry their battles forever. Thank you for reminding us." Her older girl, clutching a tiny flag, added, "You're like a superhero, mister." James smiled, warmth blooming in his chest. "Just a man, sweetheart." "But I had a good friend in Rex." Matthews, still kneeling by Rex, ran a hand through the dog's fur, his voice hushed. "He's never bonded like this. You must have been something special to him." James's eyes glinted with tears. "He was the special one. Always knew when I needed him most." The silver-haired woman stepped closer, her voice trembling. "This should be a lesson for all of us. Stop judging. Start seeing." Malik nodded, his voice firm. "I'm telling everyone at school. This is real." The park's energy shifted, no longer charged with tension, but with purpose. A man in the crowd, his phone still recording, spoke up. "This is going viral. People need to see what happened here." Others nodded, some filming, others simply bearing witness. Thomas squeezed James's shoulder, pride shining. "You're not invisible anymore, brother. Not today." James looked at him, gratitude deep. "Thanks, Thomas, for standing up when it counted." Conway cleared her throat, addressing the crowd. "We'll do better." "I promise." Walsh nodded, conviction in his voice. "This changes things. For us, for the community." Brooks, quieter now, added, "I want to learn, sir. How to see people, not problems." James nodded, his voice steady. "Start by listening. Really listening." The crowd's faces, young, old, skeptical, hopeful, reflected a shared resolve, as if James's story had cracked open something long buried. Rex sighed, rolling onto his side, his warmth a steady anchor. James wiped his eyes, a quiet joy settling in. For the first time in years, he felt held, not just by Rex's loyalty, but by the community forming around him. The mother hugged her daughters, whispering, "Always look for the good in people, okay?" The silver-haired woman tucked her tissue away, her voice firm. "I'm writing about this. The world needs to know." Matthews stood, his hand lingering on Rex's back. "Mr. Carter, you're welcome to see him any time. He'd want that." James smiled, scratching Rex's ears. "I'd like that, officer. We've got some catching up to do." The crowd chuckled, a gentle release, the park's shadows softening as stars blinked awake overhead. James looked around, humbled by the kindness washing over him. "I never wanted attention," he said, his voice clear. "Just a place to belong. Maybe we all do." The words hung, simple but profound, binding the crowd in a moment of shared truth. Walsh spoke, almost to himself. "We'll make sure this park is that place, sir. For everyone." Thomas grinned, clapping James's back. "See? You always had a way of bringing folks together." As the night deepened, the crowd lingered, reluctant to let the moment slip, their hearts carrying a new promise: to see, to listen, to heal, one act of compassion at a time. The night had settled over Lincoln Park, its velvet darkness pierced by the soft glow of lamplights and the distant hum of the city. James Carter sat on the weathered bench, Rex curled at his feet, the German shepherd's steady breathing a quiet anchor. Thomas Reed lingered beside him, his military-pinned cap tilted back, eyes scanning the thinning crowd. The air carried the crisp edge of evening, laced with the faint sweetness of jasmine and the memory of a moment that had shifted everything. The officers, Daniel Walsh, Ethan Brooks, and Sarah Conway, huddled near a flickering lamppost, their voices low, grappling with the weight of what they'd witnessed. James's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket, a sound so foreign it startled him. He pulled it out, the screen glowing with messages from strangers, words of gratitude, apologies, and hope. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," one read. "You reminded me to look closer." Another, "My dad was a vet, too." Your story made him cry. James's hands trembled, his heart pounding with disbelief. For years, he'd been a shadow, unseen in a world that moved too fast. Now, his story was a spark, spreading beyond the park's borders. Thomas glanced over, a grin breaking through his stern facade. "Brother, you're famous. Folks are saying you've brought this town together." James shook his head, still dazed. "I didn't do anything special, Thomas. Just sat here, waiting for the sun to set." Thomas's voice softened, serious. "You showed them decency, James." "Without a fist or a shout. That's rarer than you think." Across the city, the story rippled. Morning news anchors, their voices bright with urgency, replayed clips of James and Rex, the dog's tail wagging as he nuzzled his old friend. A veteran's quiet dignity and a canine's loyalty teach us to look beyond the surface, one anchor said, her eyes misty. Social media buzzed. Hashtags like #LincolnPark, hero trending, comments flooding in. "This is what America should be." "Thank you, James and Rex." A teenager posted, "I was there. It was even bigger than the video." At the police station, Walsh and Matthews faced their chief, a stern woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense gaze. "Walk me through it," she said, her voice sharp. Walsh spoke first, his tone vulnerable. "We misjudged, Chief. Saw a man on a bench, not a hero. We let fear lead." Matthews nodded, his hand twitching as if still feeling Rex's fur. "That dog knew more than we did. Showed us what loyalty looks like." The chief leaned back, studying them. "The city's watching. You'll take sensitivity training, speak at community meetings. Tell them about James. Tell them what you felt when Rex chose him over orders." Brooks, silent until now, raised his head. "I want to apologize to Mr. Carter in person. To the park, if I have to." The chief nodded, her expression softening. "You will." "Make it right." Outside, the silver-haired woman, a journalist named Ellen, typed furiously, her article blazing across the local paper's website. "A park divided, a community healed, one veteran's story." Comments poured in, from veterans sharing their own struggles to parents vowing to teach their children compassion. Back at the park, James and Thomas sat side by side, Rex's head resting on James's knee. Matthews had returned with permission to bring Rex daily. "You two belong together," he said, smiling. "Rex will let me know when it's time to go." A steady stream of visitors approached, some offering thanks, others sharing stories of service or loss. A young woman, her voice shaking, said, "My brother came back from Iraq." "Never talks about it. Your story gave me hope." James took her hand, steady. "He's not alone." "Tell him that." Malik and his friends arrived, their faces lit with excitement. "Yo, Mr. Carter, kids at school saw the video," Malik said, grinning. "They're calling you a legend." His friend, the boy in the faded hoodie, added, "My uncle's a cop. I showed him. He said he's gonna think twice now." James smiled, warmth spreading. "That's how it starts, boys, one person at a time." The mother from the crowd returned with her daughters, the younger one clutching a tin of homemade cookies. "For you and Rex," she said, her voice soft. The girl knelt, stroking Rex's ears. "You're the bravest dog ever," she whispered. James's heart swelled, each gesture stitching closed wounds he'd carried too long. He looked at the bench, its splintered wood now a symbol, not of solitude, but of connection. Brooks approached, hat in hand, his steps hesitant. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice unsteady. "I was wrong yesterday. I saw a problem, not a person." "I'm sorry." James studied him, seeing not the brash officer, but a man humbled by truth. "Takes guts to face that," James said, extending his hand. "We all make mistakes. It's what comes after that counts." Brooks shook his hand, relief washing over him, a lesson settling deep. The park, bathed in morning light, felt transformed. Strangers lingered, drawn to the bench, some sitting beside James to talk, others just breathing in the peace he'd fought for. Ellen, the journalist, returned, her eyes bright. "The mayor wants to honor you, Mr. Carter." "A ceremony, right here. Everyone's invited." James blinked, gratitude overwhelming. "I never imagined." Thomas clapped his back, grinning. "See what happens when you let folks in?" As the sun climbed, casting golden rays across the grass, James felt the city shift around him. News vans parked nearby, reporters scribbling notes, but it was the quiet moments, Malik's grin, the girl's cookies, Brooks's apology, that mattered most. Rex lifted his head, eyes glinting with that old, unwavering trust. James scratched his ears, whispering, "We did all right, didn't we?" The dog sighed, content, and for the first time in decades, James believed he might truly belong. His story, a bridge for a community, ready to listen. The morning sun broke over Lincoln Park, its golden rays spilling across the grass, warming the weathered bench that had become a quiet landmark. James Carter sat there, Rex sprawled at his feet, the German shepherd's fur glinting in the light. The air carried the fresh scent of dew and blooming jasmine, mingling with the hum of anticipation. Today was no ordinary day. A ceremony to honor James had drawn a crowd that stretched across the park, a tapestry of faces young and old, veterans in crisp uniforms, teenagers in hoodies, and families clutching homemade signs. Thomas Reed stood beside James, his military-pinned cap tilted proudly, his eyes bright with unspoken pride. The park buzzed with life, yet a reverent hush fell as the mayor, a woman with a warm smile and steady voice, stepped to a podium near the bench. "Today," she began, her words carrying over the crowd, "we honor not just a man, but a message, a call to see one another with compassion. James Carter has shown us that dignity is not earned. It is honored in ourselves and others." The crowd erupted in applause, Malik and his friends whooping loudly, the younger girl from days before waving a tiny flag with fierce enthusiasm. Rex barked, tail wagging, as if sensing the moment's weight. James rose, his olive-green jacket neatly pressed, his steps slow but sure. The scar on his forearm, hidden beneath his sleeve, no longer burned with memory. It was a mark of survival, not shame. He approached the podium, his heart pounding, not with fear, but with gratitude. The crowd's faces, Officer Daniel Walsh, Ethan Brooks, Sarah Conway, the silver-haired journalist Ellen, the mother and her daughters, reflected a shared journey from suspicion to unity. A polished bronze plaque gleamed on the bench, its inscription catching the light. Dedicated to all who serve, seen and unseen. A place of peace, courage, and belonging. James cleared his throat, his voice steady, resonant. "Thank you for this honor, and for making room for all of us." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd, lingering on Thomas's tear-streaked face, on Rex's loyal eyes. Sometimes the hardest battles are not fought overseas. They are fought right here, in our hearts, every time we choose to care instead of turn away. The crowd leaned in, hanging on his words. None of us get through life alone. We need a place to rest, a friend to trust, a community that believes we matter. This bench, he said, touching its splintered wood, reminds us we are not invisible, and we are never truly alone. Applause swelled, echoing off the trees, a chorus of agreement and hope. Malik pumped his fist, shouting, "That's right, Mr. Carter." The mother hugged her daughters, whispering, "Remember this, always." Ellen lowered her camera, tears glinting, her article already spreading the story nationwide. Officer Walsh, standing with his colleagues, nodded solemnly, his face reflecting hard-earned humility. Brooks, his hat clutched tightly, spoke up, his voice unsteady but strong. "Thank you, Mr. Carter, for forgiving us, for teaching us how to see." Thomas stepped forward, his hand on James's shoulder. "You always had a way of bringing folks together, brother." James smiled, warmth flooding his chest. "Couldn't have done it without you, Thomas." "Or you, Rex." The dog lifted his head, letting out a contented huff, his presence a bridge between past and present. Matthews, standing nearby, grinned. "He's got a home with you any time, sir." "He's made that clear." The crowd chuckled, the sound light, healing. The mayor gestured to the crowd, her voice warm. "This park, this bench, is a promise. To listen, to understand, to build a community where everyone belongs." She handed James a small key, symbolic of the city's trust. "For you, and for all who come after." James took it, his fingers trembling, not with age but with the weight of belonging. He looked out at the faces, veterans sharing quiet nods, teenagers filming for their friends, the elderly man in the red cap wiping his eyes, and saw not strangers, but family. As the ceremony wound down, people lingered, drawn to the bench. A young veteran approached James, his voice shy. "I served in Afghanistan. Never thought anyone would care. You gave me hope." James clasped his hand, steady. "You're not alone, son. Never will be." The mother and her daughters offered James a drawing, the younger girl beaming. "It's you and Rex saving the park." James knelt, his eyes misty. "This is better than any medal, sweetheart." Malik and his friends crowded around, their energy infectious. "We're starting a club at school," Malik said, grinning. "To learn about veterans, make sure their stories get told." James nodded, pride swelling. "That's how you change the world, boys." Ellen approached, her notebook tucked away. "Your story's gone global, Mr. Carter. People are listening, really listening." James shook his head, humble. "It's not just my story. It's all of ours." The sun dipped lower, casting long golden rays across the park, painting the crowd in a glow that felt almost sacred. James returned to the bench, Rex settling beside him, Thomas at his side. A comfortable silence bloomed, broken only by the distant laughter of children and the rustle of leaves. "You know," Thomas murmured, "if more folks had the courage to listen, the world might be gentler." James nodded, his gaze soft. "All it takes is one moment, one act of kindness, one friend who remembers." As dusk settled, stars blinking awake, James closed his eyes, peace flowing through him. The park, once a place of solitude, was now a home, its bench a testament to compassion's power. He felt the city around him, officers laughing with neighbors, families sharing stories, a community renewed, and knew the world could change, heart by heart. Rex sighed, his warmth a steady anchor, and James whispered, "We found our place, old friend." For the first time in decades, he believed it, the promise of belonging etched not just in bronze, but in every soul who'd stood with him under the morning sun. Police let canine loose on disabled black veteran. What the dog did shocked everyone.